In the opulent emirate of Al-Qaria, where golden sands stretched endlessly beneath the scorching sun and gleaming skyscrapers pierced the azure sky, Crown Prince Karim Al-Rahman lived a life most could only dream of. His world was one of incomparable luxury, where every whim was immediately satisfied, and his mere presence commanded unwavering respect. Yet within the magnificent walls of the royal palace, he felt more confined than free. At 32, Karim was the epitome of modern royalty, educated at the world's finest institutions, groomed from birth to lead his nation, and blessed with both intelligence and charm. His public appearances always drew admiring crowds, and his diplomatic skills had already earned him respect from world leaders. But behind the perfectly crafted image of the future ruler, there existed a man struggling with the weight of expectations. That morning, as he stood in his private study overlooking the city he would one day rule, Karim felt the familiar tension in his shoulders. The morning's newspaper lay open on his desk, featuring yet another article speculating about his future marriage. The pressure to choose a suitable bride was mounting, with his father, the emir, growing increasingly impatient. "Your Highness," his personal assistant Ahmed interrupted his thoughts. "The Board of Ministers is awaiting your arrival for the economic summit." Karim nodded, adjusting his pristine white thobe. These meetings had become more frequent lately, as the emirate faced unprecedented economic challenges. Foreign investments were mysteriously withdrawing, and several major development projects had stalled without explanation. His father's advisors whispered about hidden forces working against their nation's interests, but no one could identify the source. As he walked through the palace's marble corridors, Karim noticed a fleeting movement in his peripheral vision, a figure in the staff uniform quickly disappearing around a corner. There was something different about the way this person moved, a grace that seemed out of place among the usual staff. For a moment, he considered investigating, but the weight of his responsibilities pulled him toward the meeting room. The economic summit dragged on for hours, filled with concerning reports and complex financial projections. Yet Karim's mind kept wandering back to that glimpse in the hallway. In a palace where every face was familiar, where staff were carefully vetted and positions passed down through generations of loyal families, a new presence was noteworthy. Later that afternoon, during a rare moment of solitude in the palace gardens, Karim caught another glimpse of the mysterious figure. This time, he saw more, a young woman with dark hair partially hidden beneath her uniform headscarf, moving with purposeful dignity through the flower beds. She was tending to the roses with such care that she didn't notice his presence at first. When she finally looked up and saw him, their eyes met for a brief moment. In that instant, Karim saw something he rarely encountered: genuine surprise, and what appeared to be fear, quickly masked behind a professional facade. Before he could speak, she had gathered her gardening tools and disappeared into the maze of hedges. That evening, during the formal dinner with visiting diplomats, Karim found himself distracted. While nodding at appropriate intervals to a Japanese ambassador's lengthy explanation of potential technological partnerships, his eyes scanned the edges of the grand dining hall, seeking another glimpse of the mysterious gardener. "My son," his father's voice cut through his thoughts, "Ambassador Tanaka is proposing an interesting solution to our recent technical challenges." Karim straightened in his chair, forcing himself to focus on the conversation, but his mind kept returning to those few seconds in the garden, to the look in the young woman's eyes. In a world where every interaction was carefully choreographed, where people approached him with practiced deference and calculated ambition, that moment of genuine emotion stood out like a shooting star in the night sky. What he didn't know then was that this simple encounter would set in motion events that would challenge everything he believed about his destiny, his duty, and the true meaning of freedom. The mysterious gardener carried secrets that could shake the foundations of his world, and her presence in the palace was far from accidental. As the evening wore on and discussions of trade agreements and diplomatic allegiances filled the air, neither Karim nor the young woman realized that they were being watched. In the shadows of the palace, others had noticed their brief interaction, and wheels were already being set in motion that would change both their lives forever. In the servants' quarters of the royal palace, Samira Ahmad carefully removed her gardening uniform, her hands trembling slightly as she recalled the unexpected encounter with Crown Prince Karim. 6 months of careful anonymity threatened by a single moment of carelessness. She had chosen the gardens specifically because they were usually empty during the afternoon heat, a safe space to work without drawing attention. Living in the shadows had become second nature to her since arriving at Al-Qaria. Her forged references had passed the palace's security screening thanks to help from the underground network that had assisted her escape. The irony wasn't lost on her. Seeking refuge in one of the most heavily guarded places in the country, hiding in plain sight among the countless staff members who kept the royal palace running. Every morning she would wake before dawn for morning prayers, then blend seamlessly into the army of workers, maintaining the palace's immaculate appearance. She had learned to make herself invisible, to lower her eyes in the presence of the royal family and their guests, to move silently through the corridors like a ghost. But now the Crown Prince had noticed her, and that changed everything. As she prepared for bed in her small room, shared with 2 other female staff members, Samira's phone vibrated with a message. Her heart rate quickened as she read the encrypted text from her contact. "He's getting closer. 3 of his men were spotted in Al-Qaria last week. Be careful." Ibrahim al-Rashid's influence seemed to stretch across borders like an invisible web. The business magnate had built his empire through a combination of brilliant strategy and ruthless determination. To him, their arranged marriage was just another business transaction, a way to merge his corporation with her family's considerable holdings. Her refusal had been unprecedented, an insult he couldn't ignore. The next morning, Samira deliberately changed her routine, switching from the gardens to indoor cleaning duties. As she dusted the antique vases in the Eastern Wing's corridor, she heard approaching footsteps and quickly slipped into an alcove. Through the intricate lattice screen, she watched as Crown Prince Karim walked past, engaged in conversation with his security chief. "The background checks on all new staff from the past year need to be reviewed," Karim was saying. "Something about our recent security breaches feels coordinated." Samira's breath caught in her throat. A security review could expose the irregularities in her documentation. She would need to be even more careful now, perhaps request a transfer to a different section of the palace where she would be less visible. But fate had other plans. As she emerged from her hiding place, she found herself face to face with the Crown Prince, who had apparently doubled back. This time there was no escape. "You seem to have a habit of disappearing," he said, his tone curious rather than accusatory. "What's your name?" "Samira, Your Highness," she replied, keeping her eyes downcast as protocol demanded. "I apologize for any disruption to your routine." "No apology necessary," he responded, studying her with increasing interest. "You're new here, aren't you? I don't recall seeing you before this week." "I've been here 6 months, Your Highness," she answered truthfully, her heart pounding. "I usually work in the gardens." "6 months?" He seemed surprised. "Yet I only noticed you recently. How is that possible in my own home?" Before she could formulate a response, the palace's public address system crackled to life, announcing the arrival of an important diplomatic delegation. Karim's attention was pulled away by his duties, but not before he gave her one last thoughtful look. That evening, as Samira worked late cleaning the library, she found herself drawn to the massive windows overlooking the city. The lights of Al-Qaria sparkled like scattered diamonds against the desert night. Somewhere out there, Ibrahim's agents were searching for her, methodically working their way through the Emirate's population. She was so lost in her thoughts that she didn't hear the library door open. When she turned, she found Crown Prince Karim standing in the doorway, watching her with an unreadable expression. The room suddenly felt too small, too intimate. "You see it too, don't you?" he asked, moving to stand beside her at the window. The weight of it all, the expectations, the pressure. His words caught her off guard. For a moment, she forgot about their respective positions, about the danger of being noticed. In his voice, she heard an echo of her own struggle against a predetermined fate. But before she could respond, a noise in the corridor shattered the moment. As voices approached the library, Samira slipped away through a side door, leaving Karim alone with his thoughts and growing curiosity about the mysterious woman who seemed to understand without words the gilded prison they both inhabited. The following weeks brought subtle but significant changes to life within the palace. Walls. Crown Prince Karim found himself creating reasons to visit the library in the evenings, knowing Samira would be there, quietly organizing books or dusting shelves. Their conversations, though brief, grew increasingly meaningful, each word carefully chosen, each silence laden with unspoken understanding. During one such evening, as the setting sun painted the library in shades of gold and amber, Karim noticed Samira's interest in a particular volume of classical poetry. "You understand the verses?" he asked, noting the way her fingers had lingered on the ancient text. "My father insisted on a classical education," she replied, then immediately tensed, realizing she'd revealed more than intended. The daughter of a wealthy family would not be working as a palace servant. Karim caught the slip, but chose not to comment. Instead, he pulled the book from the shelf and began reading aloud, his voice giving life to verses about destiny and choice, about cages both visible and invisible. When he looked up, he saw tears in Samira's eyes, quickly blinked away. Meanwhile, in the broader world beyond the palace, pressure was mounting. The Emir's council had called an emergency meeting to discuss the increasingly aggressive economic maneuvers threatening the Emirate's stability. Major development projects were being systematically undermined, investors were withdrawing without explanation, and rumors of impending crisis filled the financial districts. "Your Highness," the finance minister addressed Karim during the meeting, "we've traced the source of these disruptions. Ibrahim al-Rashid's corporations are behind many of the withdrawn investments." The name sent a chill through the room. Al-Rashid was known throughout the region as a businessman whose influence rivaled that of many ruling families. His recent aggressive behavior toward Al-Qaria seemed personal, but no one could understand why. That same afternoon, Karim's father summoned him to his private study. The Emir looked tired, the weight of recent events evident in his bearing. "Son, it's time we discussed your marriage," he began without preamble. "Sheikh Abdullah's daughter would make an excellent match. The alliance would strengthen our position considerably." Karim had expected this conversation, but the timing caught him off guard. "Father, with all due respect, shouldn't we focus on addressing the economic crisis first?" "This is precisely about addressing the crisis," the Emir replied firmly. "Our enemies sense weakness in our transition period. A strong alliance through marriage would show them our position remains unassailable." Later that evening, seeking solitude to process his father's words, Karim found himself in the palace gardens. To his surprise, Samira was there, tending to the roses in the fading light. She looked different in the sunset, more vulnerable, more real. "You're not just a gardener," he said quietly, making her jump, "or a cleaner, or any of the roles you play here." Samira's hands stilled on the roses. "Your Highness." "Please," he interrupted, "when we're alone, just Karim." "We shouldn't be alone at all," she replied, but didn't move away. "It's dangerous." "What's dangerous is pretending, living behind masks. I've done it my entire life, but lately," he paused, searching for words, "lately I find myself questioning everything I've been taught to believe." Their eyes met, and for a moment, all the barriers between them, of class, culture, and circumstance, seemed to fade away. Samira saw not the crown prince, but simply a man trapped by expectations, just as she was trapped by her past. Karim saw not a mysterious servant, but a woman carrying burdens as heavy as his own. "Sometimes," Samira said softly, "the most dangerous path is the only one that leads to freedom." Before Karim could respond, the garden's peace was shattered by approaching voices. As usual, Samira vanished quickly into the shadows, leaving him alone with his thoughts and the lingering scent of roses. What neither of them realized was that their brief encounters had not gone unnoticed. In a luxurious office tower overlooking the city, Ibrahim al-Rashid received a photograph on his secure phone, an image of Karim and Samira in the garden captured moments before. His expression remained neutral as he studied the picture, but His fingers tightened on the phone until his knuckles turned white. Back in the palace, preparations were already underway for a grand diplomatic gala, an event that would bring together the most powerful figures in the region. It would be a perfect opportunity to announce the Crown Prince's engagement, or for carefully laid plans to finally spring into action. The days leading up to the diplomatic gala transformed the palace into a whirlwind of activity. Every surface was polished to perfection, every flower arrangement strategically placed, every detail scrutinized with microscopic precision. Amid this controlled chaos, Samira felt increasingly exposed. More security personnel roamed the halls, and background checks on staff had intensified. During her morning shift, she overheard two senior maids discussing the upcoming event. "They say Sheikh Abdullah's daughter will be attending," one whispered. "The announcement of her engagement to the Crown Prince is practically guaranteed." The words shouldn't have affected her, but Samira felt her heart constrict. She had no right to these feelings, no claim to the future she sometimes allowed herself to imagine in weak moments. Her own future was precarious enough without adding impossible dreams to the mix. Meanwhile, Karim found himself trapped in an endless series of meetings and preparations. His father had made it clear that the gala would be a turning point for the emirate. "Our allies need to see strength," the emir insisted during a private breakfast. "Your marriage to Amira Abdullah will stabilize the region and send a clear message to those who would threaten our prosperity." But Karim's thoughts kept drifting to the garden, to conversations in the library, to moments of genuine connection that had become increasingly precious. During a brief respite from his duties, he made his way to the palace's private mosque for afternoon prayers. To his surprise, he found Samira there, lost in her own devotions. She rose quickly when she noticed him, but he gestured for her to stay. They prayed side by side, the sacred space creating a momentary bubble of peace where titles and social barriers held no meaning. As they finished, Karim broke protocol by speaking first. "I need to understand," he said quietly. "Who are you really, Samira?" She met his gaze steadily, years of practiced caution warring with an increasing desire to trust. "Someone who made a choice," she finally replied, "a choice between accepting a life planned by others or risking everything for freedom." "And now," he pressed, "are you free?" "Freedom is relative, Your Highness. Sometimes we exchange one cage for another, hoping the new one has wider bars." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of other worshippers, but something had shifted between them. That evening, Karim found himself unable to focus during a crucial meeting with his advisors. The discussion centered on the increasingly aggressive economic maneuvers threatening the emirate's stability. "Ibrahim al-Rashid's influence is spreading," his economic advisor reported. "He's systematically blocking our access to international markets. The pressure on our financial institutions is unprecedented." "What does he want?" Karim demanded. "There must be a reason for these attacks." The advisor hesitated. "Our intelligence suggests he's searching for something or someone. He's been making inquiries throughout the region about a woman who disappeared from his household 6 months ago." Karim felt his blood run cold as pieces of the puzzle began falling into place. The timing of Samira's arrival at the palace, her careful anonymity, her fear of being noticed, it all suddenly made terrible sense. That night, unable to sleep, he made his way to the library. As if drawn by the same restless energy, Samira was there, organizing books with trembling hands. When she saw him, she knew immediately that something had changed. "He's looking for you, isn't he?" Karim asked without preamble. "Al-Rashid, you're—" "The reason he's targeting the emirate." Samira's silence was answer enough. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "I should leave. The damage I'm causing—" "No," Karim interrupted, surprising them both with his vehemence. "Running isn't the answer. Not anymore." "You don't understand what he's capable of," Samira protested. "The resources at his disposal, the influence he wields. He sees me as his property, and he never lets go of what he considers his." Karim moved closer, fighting the urge to reach out to her. "I understand more than you think." about being seen as property, about having your life planned out by others, about the weight of expectations that threaten to crush your soul. The air between them crackled with unspoken emotions and dangerous possibilities. Outside the library, windows, the lights of Alcaria sparkled like 1,000 watching eyes, while inside 2 people from vastly different worlds stood on the precipice of decisions that would change everything. Neither of them noticed the security camera in the corner, its red light blinking steadily, capturing every moment of their clandestine meeting. In his office across the city, Ibrahim al-Rashid watched the feed with cold satisfaction, finalizing his plans for the upcoming gala. The time for games was over. The morning of the diplomatic gala arrived with an atmosphere of barely contained tension. The palace hummed with activity as final preparations were made for what promised to be the most significant social event of the year. Every member of staff had been briefed on their duties, every security measure double-checked, every detail scrutinized to ensure perfection. Samira watched the preparations from the shadows, her heart growing heavier with each passing hour. She had received another encrypted message from her contact. Al-Rashid's private jet landed an hour ago. He's on the guest list for tonight's gala. You need to leave now. But leaving was no longer a simple option, not just because of her growing feelings for Karim, but because she had learned through the palace grapevine that Al-Rashid had stationed men at every major exit from the emirate. Her carefully planned escape routes had been systematically closed off one by one. In his private chambers, Karim adjusted his formal dress uniform, the weight of the ceremonial sword at his hip, nothing compared to the burden in his heart. His father had made it clear at breakfast. Tonight's gala would include the formal announcement of his engagement to Amira Abdullah. The political alliance was too important, the timing too crucial to delay any longer. The future of our emirate depends on this union, the emir had said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Al-Rashid's economic attacks have left us vulnerable. This marriage will strengthen our position and restore confidence in our stability. As Karim stared at his reflection, a knock at the door announced the arrival of Ahmed, his personal assistant. Your Highness, there's something you need to see. He handed Karim a tablet displaying security footage from the previous night. Karim and Samira in the library. Who else has seen this? Karim demanded, his voice tight with concern. No one, Your Highness. I intercepted it before it reached the security chief's morning briefing. Ahmed hesitated before continuing. But there's more. Our intelligence unit reports that Al-Rashid has been gathering compromising information about every member of your father's council. He's preparing to use it as leverage. Karim's mind raced with the implications. This wasn't just about finding Samira anymore. Al-Rashid was positioning himself to control the entire emirate through blackmail and economic pressure. The marriage alliance with the Abdullah family suddenly seemed like a flimsy shield against such a calculated assault. As evening approached, guests began arriving at the palace. Limousines and luxury cars formed a gleaming procession through the main gates, delivering the elite of the Arab world to the gala. Among them, Ibrahim al-Rashid's distinctive silver Rolls-Royce stood out like a shark among smaller fish. In the servants' quarters, Samira prepared for her assigned duty of helping in the kitchen, her uniform feeling more like armor than ever before. She had considered running one last time, but something held her back. Perhaps it was pride or exhaustion, or the growing certainty that this game of cat and mouse had to end somewhere. The grand ballroom blazed with light, crystal chandeliers reflecting off marble floors and gilded walls. Karim stood at his father's side, greeting guests with practiced charm while his mind wandered to the kitchen where he knew Samira would be working. The weight of his ceremonial sword seemed to increase with each passing minute. Sheikh Abdullah arrived with his daughter Amira, a striking woman whose intelligence shone in her eyes. Under different circumstances, Karim might have appreciated the political wisdom of their match. But as they exchanged polite greetings, all he could think about was a pair of different eyes, ones that had seen through his royal facade to the man beneath. As the evening progressed, Karim noticed Al-Rashid moving through the crowd like a master chess player, engaging in brief conversations with key members of the court. Each person he spoke to seemed to leave the interaction slightly paler, slightly more subdued. The message was clear. He held power over them all. In the kitchen, Samira helped prepare trays of delicacies for the servers to carry into the ballroom. Through the service doors, she caught glimpses of the glittering crowd, of Karim in his formal uniform, of Al-Rashid's commanding presence. The air felt thick with anticipation, as if the entire gathering was merely a prelude to something more significant. What no one in the ballroom realized was that beneath the surface of diplomatic pleasantries and social niceties, multiple plots were reaching their critical moment. Al-Rashid had positioned his pieces carefully. Karim was preparing to make a decision that would shake the foundations of his world, and Samira held secrets that could change everything. As the emir prepared to make his long-anticipated announcement, the carefully orchestrated evening was about to spiral into chaos. The storm that had been gathering for months was finally about to break. The grand ballroom of Al-Qariya's royal palace had witnessed countless historic moments over the centuries, but none quite like what was about to unfold. As the orchestra played traditional music and guests mingled over champagne and canapes, three people moved through the crowd like planets caught in each other's gravitational pull, their orbits drawing ever closer to an inevitable collision. Karim stood near the dais where his father would soon make the engagement announcement, exchanging pleasantries with dignitaries while keeping one eye on Ibrahim al-Rashid. The businessman had spent the last hour in deep conversation with various council members, each interaction leaving its mark in subtle but noticeable ways, a trembling hand here, a forced smile there. In the kitchen, Samira's carefully maintained composure began to crack. Through the service doors, she had heard snippets of conversation about the imminent announcement of the Crown Prince's engagement. Each mention felt like a physical blow, even though she had no right to feel this way. She was about to request a break when a junior staff member rushed in, face flushed with excitement. Al-Rashid's asking for a specific server, the young man announced. He says he won't accept his drinks from anyone else. He's requesting the new girl, the one who works in the gardens. Time seemed to stop. In that moment, Samira knew that everything she had feared was coming to pass. Al-Rashid hadn't just found her. He had orchestrated this entire situation. The other kitchen staff looked at her expectantly, unaware of the drama unfolding before them. With trembling hands, Samira picked up the silver tray with Al-Rashid's preferred drink. As she pushed through the service doors into the ballroom, she felt as though she were walking into the lion's den. The lights seemed too bright, the music too loud, the crowd too dense. Karim saw her the moment she entered. Even in the standard server's uniform, she carried herself with an innate grace that set her apart. He watched as she made her way through the crowd, his stomach clenching when he realized her destination. Without thinking, he began moving in, the same direction. Ibrahim al-Rashid stood near one of the ornate pillars, a small group of businessmen hanging on his every word. When he saw Samira approaching with his drink, a smile spread across his face that never reached his eyes. "Ah, at last," he said loudly enough to draw attention from nearby guests. "The service here is impeccable, isn't it, gentlemen? They somehow always know exactly what you need." Samira kept her eyes lowered as she offered the tray, but Al-Rashid wasn't finished. "Although sometimes," he continued, his voice carrying further now, "the staff can be a bit unreliable, disappearing without notice, breaking contracts, causing all sorts of trouble." More heads turned toward them. Karim was only steps away now, close enough to see the slight tremor in Samira's hands as she held the tray. Al-Rashid took his drink, but didn't step back. "You know," he addressed the growing audience, "I've always believed that order must be maintained, that agreements must be honored, that those who break their word must face consequences." His eyes never left Samira's face. "Wouldn't you agree, Your Highness?" he asked, acknowledging Karim's presence without turning. The Crown Prince stepped forward, his voice steady despite the rage building inside him. "I believe context matters, Mr. Al-Rashid, as does the nature of the agreement and whether all parties entered into it willingly." A murmur went through the crowd. The emir, noticing the The growing disturbance began making his way toward them. Al-Rashid's smile widened. "Ah, but Your Highness, in our world, personal desires must often bow to larger considerations. Speaking of which, I believe your father is about to make an important announcement regarding your own arranged future." Samira finally looked up, her eyes meeting Karim's for a brief electric moment. In that silent exchange, something shifted. A decision was made, a threshold crossed. "No," Karim said, his voice carrying across the now hushed ballroom. "I don't believe he is." The emir arrived just in time to hear his son's words. "Karim," he warned, "don't do anything rash." "Rash?" Al-Rashid laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Your Highness, rashness is what brought us all to this point. When people forget their place, when they break their promises, when they reach beyond their station," his gaze flickered between Karim and Samira. "Everything falls apart." What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Al-Rashid reached for Samira's arm, perhaps to prove his point, perhaps to reclaim what he saw as his property. But before he could make contact, Karim stepped between them, his movement decisive and deliberate. The gesture, small as it was, sent shockwaves through the assembled crowd. Here was the Crown Prince, physically positioning himself between a powerful businessman and a mere servant at what was supposed to be his own engagement celebration. "Your Highness," Al-Rashid said softly, dangerously, "you don't want to do this. You don't know what's at stake." "I know exactly what's at stake," Karim replied, his voice carrying to every corner of the silent ballroom. "I've always known. I just hadn't understood what I was willing to risk for it until now." The aftermath of Karim's declaration rippled through the ballroom like a stone thrown into still water. Whispers erupted among the guests, phones appeared in hands as people rushed to share the scandal, and the orchestra's music faltered before stopping completely. In the sudden silence, the emir's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Everyone out," he commanded, his tone brooking no argument. "This is a private family matter." The assembled guests needed no further encouragement. They filed out quickly, their excited murmurs growing louder as they reached the hallway. Sheikh Abdullah led his daughter away with as much dignity as he could muster, while Al-Rashid remained exactly where he was, a calculating smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Family matter," he said smoothly. "I think not, Your Excellency. This became a matter of international business the moment your son chose to interfere with my personal affairs." The emir's face darkened. "Whatever business dealings you have with my emirate can be discussed tomorrow, in proper channels." "Can they?" Al-Rashid reached into his jacket and withdrew a tablet. "Perhaps we should discuss them now. Your Minister of Finance might be particularly interested in certain offshore accounts I've discovered, and your head of security might want to explain some interesting connections to foreign powers." Samira stepped forward, her voice steady despite her fear. "This is between you and me, Ibrahim. Leave them out of it." "My dear," he replied, his voice dripping with false kindness, "it was never just about you. You were merely the catalyst, the perfect opportunity to implement a much grander plan. Did you really think I spent months orchestrating this economic pressure just to find one runaway bride?" Karim's hand tightened on his ceremonial sword. "You've been planning this all along, using Samira's presence here as an excuse to gain leverage over the entire emirate." "Clever boy," Al-Rashid nodded approvingly. "Though not clever enough, it seems. Do you have any idea what you've done tonight? The alliances you've shattered? The investments you've jeopardized? All for what? A servant girl?" "A servant girl who had the courage to defy you," Karim shot back. "Something I suspect not many people have done." The emir moved between them, his patience wearing thin. "Enough. Karim, you will apologize to Mr. Al-Rashid and Sheikh Abdullah. We can still salvage this situation." "Actually," Al-Rashid interjected, "I have a better proposal." He turned to face Karim directly. "Resign your position as Crown Prince publicly. Renounce your claim to the throne. In return, I'll ensure the Emirate's economy remains stable, and all the little secrets I've gathered stay buried." A heavy silence fell over the room. The emir's face had gone pale, while Samira looked stricken. but Karim's expression remained unchanged as he studied the man before him. "You've miscalculated," he said quietly. "You think because you've gathered evidence of corruption, because you can manipulate markets and threaten our economy, that you hold all the power. But you've forgotten something crucial." "And what's that?" Al-Rashid asked, amused. "The people, my people. Who do you think they'll believe? A foreign businessman trying to buy control of their country, or their crown prince exposing corruption and fighting for reform?" For the first time, Al-Rashid's smile faltered. Karim pressed his advantage. "How long do you think your business empire would survive if every detail of your attempts to blackmail the royal family became public? If every corrupt deal, every threatened official, every manipulated market was exposed?" "You wouldn't dare," Al-Rashid hissed. "The economic damage would be catastrophic." "Perhaps," Karim agreed, "but sometimes things need to break before they can be rebuilt properly." He turned to his father. "That's what you taught me, isn't it? That a true leader must be willing to sacrifice everything for his people." The emir looked at his son as if seeing him for the first time. In the young man before him, he saw not just his heir, but a leader willing to risk everything for what he believed was right. Samira watched the exchange with growing amazement. The man she had come to know in quiet moments in the garden and library was transforming before her eyes into something more. A ruler willing to challenge the very foundations of power that had protected him all his life. But Al-Rashid wasn't finished. His face hardened as he played his final card. "Very well," he said softly. "If that's your choice, then perhaps it's time everyone learned the true identity of your precious Samira. Not just a servant, but the daughter of one of my closest business partners, promised to me in marriage. A woman who broke her sacred obligations, dishonored her family, and has been living here under false pretenses. How will your people feel about that, Your Highness?" The empty ballroom, still glittering with abandoned champagne glasses and elaborate decorations, had become an arena for a battle of wills. Karim stood his ground, his royal training evident in his steady gaze and composed demeanor, even as Al-Rashid's words hung in the air like poison. "You speak of sacred obligations," Karim finally responded, his voice carrying the weight of centuries, "of royal authority. Let's discuss those. What about your obligation to conduct business ethically, your obligation to respect the sovereignty of our nation, your obligation to basic human dignity?" Al-Rashid's face darkened. "You dare lecture me about obligations? You who would throw away centuries of tradition and stability for a woman you barely know?" "I know enough," Karim replied. "I know she had the courage to choose freedom over comfort, dignity over power. And now I'm making the same choice." The emir stepped forward, his face lined with concern. "Son, think carefully about what you're doing. The consequences will be significant," Karim finished. "But perhaps they're exactly what this emirate needs." He turned to address his father directly. "How long have we turned a blind eye to men like Al-Rashid? How long have we sacrificed our principles for political convenience?" Samira watched the exchange with growing emotion. Everything she had tried to prevent by staying hidden was now happening, yet somehow it felt right. She stepped forward, her voice clear and strong. "Your Excellency, Your Highness, I never meant to bring chaos to your house. My presence here was meant to be temporary, just a safe haven while I found a way to truly escape." "But you didn't escape, did you?" Al-Rashid interjected. "Instead, you aimed higher. The Crown Prince himself, quite an ambitious target for a runaway bride." "Enough!" Karim's voice cracked like thunder. "You speak of her as if she were property, a piece in your game of power and influence. But she is so much more than that. And so is this emirate." He turned to his father, his voice softening. "Father, you taught me that a true leader must sometimes make difficult choices for the good of his people. That tradition must be balanced with progress. That honor isn't just about maintaining appearances, but about doing what's right." The emir's expression was unreadable as he studied his son. Decades of political experience warred with paternal concern in his eyes. "And you believe this is right? Challenging one of the most powerful men in the region? Risking everything our family has built? I believe that if we don't take this stand now, there will be nothing left worth protecting," Karim replied. Al-Rashid's influence has grown too strong, his methods too corrupt. If we bow to his demands today, we'll be his puppets tomorrow." Al-Rashid's laugh was cold. "Brave words, Your Highness, but words won't save your emirate's economy when I'm finished with it. Words won't protect your family's reputation when every scandal I've uncovered becomes public. Words won't—" "No," Samira interrupted, her quiet voice somehow cutting through his tirade. "But the truth will." She moved to stand beside Karim, her head held high. "You want to expose my identity? Do it. Let everyone know how you forced my father into an arrangement he didn't want, how you threatened his business, his reputation, his family, until he agreed to sell his daughter like a commodity. Let them know how you've done the same to countless others, building your empire on threats and fear." The businessman's composure cracked slightly. "You have no proof, don't I?" Samira's smile was bitter. "Did you think I spent these months just hiding? I've worked in this palace, invisible, watching, listening. I've seen the documents that cross these halls, heard the conversations of those you've threatened, and I'm not the only one who's been gathering evidence." She glanced at Karim, who nodded slightly. "The Crown has been watching you for months," he confirmed. "Every corrupt deal, every blackmail attempt, every market manipulation. We let you continue because we needed to understand the full scope of your operation. Thanks to Samira, we finally do." The Emir stepped forward, his royal authority fully present now. "Mr. Al-Rashid, I suggest you consider your next moves very carefully. The evidence my son speaks of, it doesn't just implicate you. It exposes an entire network of corruption that spans multiple countries. If this information were to become public, the damage to your empire would be irreparable." For the first time, real fear flickered in Al-Rashid's eyes, but like a cornered animal he lashed out. "You're bluffing. You wouldn't risk the regional instability. The diplomatic fallout would be significant," Karim agreed. "But sometimes, true healing can only begin after the poison has been drawn out." He held Al-Rashid's gaze steadily. "The choice is yours. Leave this emirate. Never contact Samira or her family again. Withdraw your economic attacks. In return, we'll keep your secrets." The silence that followed was deafening. In it, the future of an emirate, the fate of two hearts, and the balance of power in an entire region hung in the balance. The following days in Al-Qaria felt like the aftermath of a desert storm. The air still charged with electricity, the landscape forever altered. Ibrahim al-Rashid's departure from the palace that night had been quiet but final, his calculated smile replaced by barely contained fury. The evidence against him was too damaging, the risks too high to continue his vendetta. In the royal council chamber, Karim stood before the assembled ministers, his father at his side as they addressed the challenges ahead. The cancelled engagement to Amira Abdullah had strained diplomatic relations, but Sheikh Abdullah, impressed by Karim's stand against corruption, had proven surprisingly understanding. "Our priority now," Karim addressed the council, "is to rebuild trust, both within our emirates and with our international partners. The corruption Al-Rashid exposed, though exaggerated for his purposes, shows us where we need to reform." The emir watched his son with newfound respect. The young man, speaking with such authority, was no longer just his heir, but a leader in his own right, one who had chosen a harder path than tradition demanded, but perhaps a more honorable one. Meanwhile, Samira faced her own challenges. Her true identity now known, she could no longer hide in the shadows of the palace. Some staff, members who had worked alongside her for months, now treated her differently, unsure how to interact with someone they had discovered was from their own social class. She had also received a letter from her father, the first contact since her escape. His words were cautious but warm, expressing relief at her safety and hinting at a desire for reconciliation. Al-Rashid's influence over their family had waned, allowing old bonds of love to resurface. One evening, as the sun set over the emirate, Karim found Samira in their garden, for so he had come to think of it. She was tending to the roses, though she no longer needed to maintain her cover as a gardener. "Some habits are hard to break," she said, noticing his amused expression. "These roses, they helped me survive those months of hiding. giving them. Life gave me purpose. Karim moved closer, touching one of the blooms gently. And now? What gives you purpose now that you're free to choose? Freedom is still a strange concept, she admitted. All my life I've been defined by others' expectations. Daughter, promised bride, fugitive, servant. Now, for the first time, I can simply be myself, whoever that is. I know who you are, Karim said softly. You're the woman who taught a prince the true meaning of courage, who showed him that real strength isn't in maintaining power, but in knowing when to risk everything for what's right. Samira turned to face him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. And you're the man who showed me that sometimes standing your ground is braver than running, that facing your fears can lead to something beautiful. The garden around them was coming alive with evening sounds, birds settling for the night, the soft whisper of wind through palm trees, the distant call to prayer floating from the city's minarets. It felt like a moment suspended in time, yet also like a beginning. The council wants me to consider other potential alliances, Karim said, breaking the comfortable silence. They worry about the political implications of us. They're right to worry, Samira replied pragmatically. Her crown prince choosing a woman who ran from an arranged marriage, it does send quite a message. Perhaps it's a message our society needs to hear. He took her hand, marveling at how natural it felt now. That traditions can evolve without being destroyed. That love and duty don't have to be enemies. In the palace behind them, lights began to illuminate the windows one by one, like stars appearing in the darkening sky. Somewhere in those halls, decisions were being made, policies were being revised, and a new future was being shaped. It won't be easy, Samira cautioned. There will be resistance, criticism, maybe even threats. I know, Karim agreed. But I've learned something important from all this. The hardest path is often the right one, and walking it becomes easier when you're not alone. As they stood together in their garden, the roses blooming around them despite the desert heat, both understood that they were standing at the threshold of something unprecedented. Their story would not just change their lives, but could potentially transform their society's understanding of love, duty, and personal freedom. The sun had almost disappeared behind the city's modern skyline, painting the clouds in shades of gold and purple. In that magical light, surrounded by the flowers they had both tended in their own ways, Karim and Samira began to plan their future, not as prince and servant, not as fugitive and protector, but as equals who had chosen each other against all odds. 1 year had passed since the night that changed everything in Al-Qaria. The emirate had weathered the storms of change with remarkable resilience, emerging stronger and more progressive than ever before. The palace, once a symbol of unchanging tradition, had become a beacon of thoughtful reform under Crown Prince Karim's influence. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the royal study, where Karim sat reviewing economic reports. The numbers told a story of recovery and growth, new investments flowing in, international partnerships strengthening, and domestic businesses thriving. The reforms he had implemented, though initially controversial, had proven successful beyond expectations. Your Highness, Ahmed interrupted, entering with a tablet in hand. The final preparations for tomorrow's ceremony are ready for your approval. Karim smiled, looking at the plans for what would be the most significant royal ceremony in Al-Qaria's recent history, not just because of its scale or the distinguished guest list, but because of what it represented, a bridge between tradition and progress, between duty and personal choice. In the palace gardens, now famous throughout the region for their innovative fusion of traditional Arabic and modern sustainable design, Samira was conducting a tour for a group of young women from local universities. The garden project had been her first initiative after her official rehabilitation into society, transforming the space into both a symbolic and practical demonstration of how old and new could coexist beautifully. You see, she explained to her attentive audience, these traditional desert roses aren't just beautiful, they represent our culture's resilience. And when we combine them with modern water conservation techniques, they show us how to preserve our heritage while embracing innovation. The young women listened intently, many taking notes. In the past year, Samira had become something of an inspiration to them, a woman who had defied convention not for the sake of rebellion, but in pursuit of authentic self-determination. Her story, though initially controversial, had sparked important conversations about personal freedom and social progress throughout the region. As the tour concluded, Karim appeared at the garden's entrance. The young women bowed respectfully, but with none of the fear or excessive deference of the past. This too was part of the change. The royal family was now seen as leaders to be respected rather than deities to be worshipped. "Ready for tomorrow?" he asked Samira as they walked together through the paths they had once traversed in secret. "Almost," she replied, her hand finding his naturally. "My father just arrived from Dubai. He's settling into his suite now." The mention of her father brought smiles to both their faces. The reconciliation between Samira and her family had been gradual but profound. Free from al-Rashid's influence, her father had revealed himself to be more progressive than anyone had imagined, becoming a vocal supporter of the reforms sweeping through the business community. "And the foundation's launch?" Karim asked, referring to the educational initiative they had developed together. "Everything's prepared. 20 young women will receive full scholarships for international universities, with guaranteed positions in the Emirates' new tech sector when they return." Her eyes shone with pride. "It's really happening, Karim. All those dreams we talked about in this garden, they're becoming reality." They reached their favorite spot where the roses still bloomed as beautifully as ever. The garden had become more than just a place of refuge. It was a symbol of their journey, of growth and transformation, of beauty emerging from unlikely circumstances. "When I first saw you here," Karim mused, "I never imagined how completely one person could change my world." "You changed it yourself," Samira corrected him gently. "I just showed you it was possible." The next day, as the sun set over Al-Qaria, the palace grounds filled with guests from around the world. They came to witness something unprecedented, a royal wedding that was also a statement of change. In the great courtyard under the open sky, Crown Prince Karim and Samira exchanged vows that blended ancient tradition with modern equality. The Emir himself blessed their union, his public support setting a powerful example for the entire region. In his speech, he spoke of how true strength lies not in rigid adherence to the past, but in the wisdom to adapt while preserving what is most valuable in one's heritage. As the celebration continued into the night with music and laughter filling the air, Karim and Samira stole a moment alone in their garden. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new obstacles to overcome, new battles to fight. But they would face them together, their love strengthened by shared purpose and mutual respect. Their story had become more than just a romance. It was a catalyst for change, a reminder that love, when pure and true, has the power to transform not just two hearts, but an entire society. Fim de Historia. Dear listeners, we hope that Karim and Samira's journey has touched your hearts as deeply as it has touched ours. Their story reminds us that true love has the power to transform not only individuals, but entire societies. If you've been moved by this tale of courage, change, and the triumph of love over tradition, we invite you to join our community of storytelling enthusiasts. Click the subscribe button to your left to access our carefully curated playlist of equally captivating love stories that challenge conventions and inspire change. Don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear which moments in Karim and Samira's journey resonated most with you. Remember, every great story has the power to change hearts and minds, and we bring you new ones every day. Until our next adventure in storytelling, keep believing in the transformative power of love.